Hi guys, it's Janae and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm continuing my read along for ErHa. I am vaguely very excited. I really like where we are at in the book right now. I just hope that keeps on going. Before we do get into it, if anyone could maybe just let me know if the audio is okay. And then also, I know we're here for ErHa, and I'm not sure how many of the people here for ErHa maybe also enjoy MXTX's works, but I have to share because I'm low-key so freaking excited. I've been waiting for the Modazushi not donga manhwa to come out, the comic version of Modazushi, and I'm I'm so happy it's here. It originally actually came out in March, but I've been waiting to get my copy, and today it arrived, and I'm so excited, and I want to show you guys because yeah. Hi, sorry. I'm glad the audio is okay. Can I just quickly take a second to show, because it's so much more beautiful than I even imagined it would be. Like, look at this. It's gorgeous, and I'm in love. And also, I was very unsure on whether or not we would be getting the manhwa in full color like it's originally released online, and they did it. They gave us full color, and it's gorgeous, and I really don't want to break the spine, but trust me when I tell you, these are amazing, and the illustrations are so good, and it smells so nice. And I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a book nerd, so I'm in seventh heaven right now. um it's so pretty. I just want to keep on taking photos of it. But yeah, so sorry, that was my fangirl moment of the day. I shall stop boring you guys with it, but I had to share it with some people who might understand the level of excitement that I am feeling right now. Um, it's not even like I don't have the novel. I not have the novel as well, but now I also own the manhwa, because why not? It's not like my wallet needs a break. So yeah, that was my excursion for the day. We specifically went to where I had to go and pick up my book. Just like we went and had lunch there just so I can go and pick up my book. But anyway, okay, so with all of that out of the way, today we are continuing, as I said, with ErHa. We are on page 185 for anyone who wants to follow along in their actual physical books. And yeah, I think we can more or less get started, because I think I talked everyone's ear off for long enough that people who want to be here probably already are. So, okay, let me just quickly. I never realized how often I get sick until I started doing these read alongs and realizing how often my throat feels like it's about to die. Okay. Chapter 62. This venerable one arrives at ancient Lin'an. Their training began without delay. Moran liked feather gathering most. After all, it wasn't like he actually expected to learn much from these losers, whom he had thoroughly trounced in his last life. Even so, having the funds to indulge himself was where it was at. Every day, before the break of dawn, they went to the ancestral abyss to loot golden feathers. Next up was meditation in Jurong Cave, to refine cultivation by tempering their inner spiritual energy with the burning yang energy of the cave. 4 hours after that was demon suppression practice with the feathered tribe. Another 4 hours after that, and they went to the Azura arena to engage in practical matches against one another. Finally, in the evening before nightfall, Miss 18 would lecture them on the demon compendium and the art of exorcism at the star-gazing cliffs of Peach Blossom Springs. This nightly lesson was of course Moran's favorite time of day, because that was the only lesson attended by cultivators from all three specializing divisions. He knew that Shimei wasn't great at qirong and worried over whether he had enough to eat, so he made sure to give Shimei half of his harvested feathers every day. Outside of that, they hardly had a chance to interact. Instead, Moran spent every day with Chuaning, and the two gradually became inseparable. That is what I would like to hear, thank you. I would like to see it depicted on the page as well, but that is what I like to hear. But also, I just realized, like, the people who are there for the healing portion, like Shimei, they probably are focusing on healing specifically because they're called, like, they're qigong, but their spiritual energy isn't really suited for the kind of things that's necessary to gather the feathers. So do all of them just collectively starve? Like, how does that work? Okay. During the span of time, they could often be seen together, day in and day out, rain or shine. Chuaning might be sitting on the railing of a bridge playing a tune on a leaf with Moran beside him, cheek propped up in one hand, or Chuaning might be feeding fish by the river while Moran stood to the side holding an umbrella, watching the koi fish leap, their golden scales glimmering against the water of clear jade. When it rained at Peach Blossom Springs, Moran could hold Chuaning's hand while they walked along a limestone footpath, its flagstones cracking from age, an oil paper umbrella held evenly above them both. If the rainwater began to collect on the ground, Moran would pick up his little Shidi and carry him on his back, and the boy would cling quietly onto his shoulders as the drops of rain pitter-pattered around them. If the close contact got to be a bit too warm and sweaty, I don't know how I read that. If the close contact got to be a bit too warm and sweat started to bead on Moran's forehead, the wordless Shidi on his back would reach out and wipe his sweat away with a handkerchief. The handkerchief was plain white, with a high-tongue flower sewn on the corner. Moran kept thinking that it looked familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. But the careless thought would fly through his mind and soon be lost, like the drizzling of rain falling into a deep pond. Guys, I'm living for this. Hi! This is everything. The only thing that could make this even better is if this bonding was taking place with them as themselves. One day, Chuaning was resting in the courtyard when Moran undid the boy's braid on a whim and tied his hair into a high ponytail instead. He was halfway through brushing his little Shidi's hair when Ye Wangxi walked in while holding his left shoulder, expression gloomy. Moran, ever observant, raised his eyebrows slightly. Did Ye Xiong get injured? Ye Wangxi paused, then furrowed his brows. It's nothing. Just got a graze in a fight. But the guy is truly such a depraved nature. How despicable. Moran sputtered in disbelief, before eventually managing to ask, Did you get groped? What exactly are you imagining? Yongxi asked harshly, glaring daggers. Ha, just kidding. Moran laughed awkwardly, but he couldn't resist his own curiosity. Who was it, though? Who could it be but that flirt from Kunlun Tashu Palace? Ye Wangxi replied. Moran let out a "ah" at those words. Could it be that guy? Moran literally knows everyone. Like, he's probably just murdered all of these people. Okay, recently he had been coming across female disciples whispering among themselves, saying, Dashi Xiong this and Dashi Xiong that. It was one thing for the younger ones to go on like that, but just a day ago he'd seen a 40 or 50-year-old female cultivator in hysterics by the flower bushes as she muttered with distant eyes, Not a single man in the world could ever hope to hold a candle to Dashi Xiong. If only he would look my way, or even speak to me, I'd willingly go to hell with no regrets. Damn, this must be one very charming-looking man. Moran had lost it right then and there and erupted in laughter at the love-lorn display. He had a sneaky suspicion as to who this Dashishung might be, but Peach Blossom Springs was full of cultivators who barely even interacted with one another, so despite hearing this person mentioned time and again, he had never seen this guy. He also had at least enough shame to refrain from inserting himself in the gossip of female disciples, so he couldn't be sure. But I thought you said, like, didn't he just say that they had, like, dinners together? Or, like, not dinners, but, like, some kind of thing together with the other cultivators? So wouldn't he have time to see all of them then? Or is it, like, there's just so many people that he wouldn't know who to look for? I was having a drink at Spirit Lake Tavern in the Western Market, Yewangshi said. That bastard happened to be there, too, with a girl on each arm. It was depraved, but that's their choice and none of my business, so I couldn't exactly say anything. Oh my word, if you only knew what Moran got up to in his past life. Makes sense, Moran agreed. Then a female Gu Yu disciple ran in, scanning the crowd with an anxious expression. She was clearly looking for someone. Moran laughed. Let me guess. She was after that Dashi Shung. You've heard of this Dashi Shung too? Huh. Well, I mean, if even an upstanding individual like you has heard of this philandering ways, how could a gossipy fellow like myself not know? Yewangshi shot him a wordless glance, then continued. The Dashishong is truly a piece of work. Turns out the Guyi girl came looking because he had exchanged tokens of affection with her some days ago, saying he would be her cultivation partner and stay by her side forever. Moran laughed again. Yeah, that's nonsense. I bet Dashishong has like 17 replicas of that token of affection, one for every girl he's after. Probably sprouts the same pledge of undying love and pledge of undying love word for word too. Chuaning had been listening quietly, but now he glanced at Moran and said, disgruntled, "Of course you would know." Chuaning, you're gonna blow your cover. You're not supposed to know these things. Okay. To his surprise, Yewangshi took Moran's side. Moshong has the rights of it. That's exactly the case. That girl was a secret admirer of Dashishung's to begin with, so she'd taken him at his word and given him her virginity the very night. Wee! Ayo! Moran hurriedly covered Chuaning's ears. What are you doing? Chuaning asked, unfazed. Little ones can't listen to that sort of thing. It's bad for your cultivation. I love this dynamic between them. I wish it could last forever. Chuaning gave him a withering look. The second Moran was sure that Chuaning's ears were firmly covered, he asked, sparkles in his eyes. And then? Yewangshi was a respectable individual. He had no idea that Moran, a rascal, was consuming his recount of righteous indignation like he would some trashy romance. Why can I imagine him, like, reading Mills and Boone? Like, if Moran was born in our modern era, he would definitely secretly read Mills and Boone. I can just imagine it. Thus he replied with an air of integrity, "What do you think?" Dashishung denied it, of course. He didn't even want to give her the time of day, let alone have some words. The girl produced the sword tassel he'd given her as a token, but to her surprise, the two girls on Dashishung's arms each pulled out their own. They said he'd given one to every friend, and that it wasn't something reserved for a cultivation partner. Tsk, that's shameless, all right? Right? I couldn't just sit and watch, so I went over to have a word with him. Yawangshi's expression shifted slightly, and there was a pause before he continued. The talk went nowhere, so we ended up fighting. I love how he's so casual about it as well. Moran smiled. I see. In actuality, he suspected that this probably wasn't the whole story. If this Dashi Shong was indeed the person that Moran suspected, then he didn't have the sort of personality that would lead him to come to blows over something like that. Ye Wangxi had likely omitted details out of embarrassment. However, since Ye Wangxi didn't elaborate, Moran didn't press the issue and changed the topic. That Dashi Shung must be pretty good in a fight then. I can't imagine just a random person being able to land a hit on Ye Shung. That was evidently the wrong thing to say, as it only seemed to make Ye Wangxi even more displeased. Fury flickered like a wildfire in those dark eyes. Pretty good? Yeah, right, Ye Wangxi said with indignation. He couldn't get any more mediocre. The women did all the fighting for him. What a good for nothing. Oh, so it was his female companions that beat you up? How did he manage to swing that? Like, what on earth kind of charm would you have to convince someone else to fight for you? Moran took a closer look at Ye Wangxi and found that, aside from the sword wound on his shoulder, there were a couple of bloody scratches on his cheeks that had obviously come from a woman's nails. He almost fell over laughing. Dashi Shung sure does live up to his reputation. Chuaning said nothing. He seemed to have been pondering something ever since Ye Wangxi said the talk went nowhere, so we ended up fighting. He waited until Ye Wangxi left to bandage his wounds in his residence before saying, Moran? Moran bobbed his head. Call me Xishong. After a long, dignified silence, Chuaning continued, This Da Xishong, is it Mei Han Shu? That's what I suspect, Moran said with a grin. Chuaning fell silent again, deep in thought. Then, as if suddenly coming to a realization, his eyes opened wide. Could it be that Ye Wangxi got... I'm clueless. Got what? Like he gets cut off. So what did he... Huh? Oh goodness, I'm not clever enough for this. Shh, quiet. Moran raised a finger to his lips in a hushing gesture, then crouched down to Chuaning's height, smiling. Aren't you a little too young to be thinking about that stuff? I've often heard that this Mei Hanshu person is very unconventional, that he's done all sorts of preposterous things. I just assumed it was. Oh, goodness. To think that he dared to have a go at a disciple of Rufeng's sect. Moran laughed. Huh. Unconventional is one way to put it. Anyway, let's stay out of other people's business. Here, let Qishong finish putting your hair up. I saw a pretty hair clasp while I was out in the West Street earlier, and it wasn't too pricey either, so I grabbed it. Let's have you try it on. I'm living for this. He bought him a hair clip, but also that means he probably won't be able to wear it once he's back in his normal body, because then it would give his identity away, which sucks. Let me just see. I think the ladies didn't let Didn't let Ye Wangxi to touch that guy. Yeah. Just as Moran didn't care for Chuaning's taste, Chuaning was less than impressed with Moran's. He stared silently at the overly vibrant and honestly gaudy hair clasp. Of course it couldn't be... It's the thought that counts, I suppose. He stared silently at the overly vibrant and honestly gaudy hair clasp which was decorated with gold orchids and butterflies. That sounds kind of nice. It depends on how it is put together, I suppose. Are you sure that's for me? Yep. Little kids should wear lively colors like red and gold. Chuaning continued to stare in mute horror and fascination. He sincerely didn't want it, but when he thought about it, this was the first time that Moran had ever given him something. He closed his mouth and said nothing, face full of gloom, as Moran fastened the clasp to his ponytail. The gold orchid and butterflies glimmered garishly against his long, inky hair. Chuaning lowered his lashes. Suddenly, he felt that this wasn't bad. This kind of color, this kind of Moran, this kind of himself. If he was in his true form, none of this would have happened. It was as if the butterflies had come from a dream. Just drive the dagger a little bit deeper, why don't you? The clouds overhead shifted and colored as sun and moon chased one another across the sky. Half a year of training at Peach Blossom Springs flew by in the blink of an eye. Miss 18 had said that they would be tested at the half-year mark to gauge their progress. This will be your first test since we come here, 18 announced gracefully to the assembly. The content of the trial will differ depending on your division, with 3 different disaster scenarios. Those of you in the defense division will enter the domain of Blood River. Those in the healing division will enter the domain of Great Sorrows, and those of you in the attack division will enter the domain of Fiends. Each of these scenarios will unfold in an illusionary realm that has been constructed using memories of the Ghost Realm invasion hundreds of years ago. You will be in no danger while within them, and you will be returned here once you have resolved the crisis therein. Up to 2 people may enter an illusionary realm at a time. In other words, you may face the challenge alone or invite one other person to accompany you. As for the order of testing, that will be announced by the envoys anon. The assembly was dismissed, and the test began. Moran didn't know how things were going over in the defense and healing divisions, but at least for the attack division, half a dozen people had already gone through it, and had all done pretty well. It seemed the trial wasn't too hard. 10 days later, it was Moran's turn. 10 days, that feels like forever. Okay. Eighteen was in charge of the attack division, and she smiled as she asked, "Will Mo Xiangjun be going with a partner?" Moran thought about it. If I choose someone to go with me, would they be exempt from going through the trial again? Of course. Then I'll bring my Shidi. Moran pointed at Chuaning. He's still young, so I'll worry if he goes in alone. The moon hung bright overhead as they followed 18 to the pitch-black cave. A thin layer of reddish-gold mist covered the entrance. "Please listen well," said 18. "The scene within the domain of fiends is one from the calamity 200 years ago. The first rupture of the Ghost Realm barrier. Because the barrier could not be repaired in time, a mass of vengeful ghosts and malicious spirits escaped into the mortal realm and slaughtered countless living beings. This illusionary realm is an emulation of the events based on the memories of a survivor from Lin'an during that time. Stepping into this cave will bring you to the battle-torn Lin'an city of 2 centuries ago. Slay the Ghost King leading the army, and the illusion will dissipate on its own." Moran glanced at Chuaning, then turned to smile at 18. "Big sis, I'm sturdy, so it's whatever, but my Shidi is only 6, and the sword doesn't have eyes. What if he gets injured?" "There is no need to fear. The weapons inside the illusion will bring you no true harm," 18 explained. "Any injury you sustain will be marked with the spiritual signifier and nothing more. However, if you are marked in a vital area representing a fatal injury, you will fail the trial." "Oh damn, okay." the stakes are pretty high. I'm not worried about Chuaning per se, but it depends on how intense the illusion is. My biggest fear is more that Moran might get like PTSD flashbacks, but I'm not sure. Relieved, Moran clasped his hands together and grinned. I see. Thank you for your kind consideration. And so Moran and Chuaning headed to the test without fear. The cave was pitch black. Setting foot within it felt like missing a step. It was as if their bodies were abruptly suspended in mid-air. The sensation was immediately followed by a series of blurry images that flashed before their eyes, a legion of contorted faces flowing together in a river passing below them. When their feet landed back on solid ground, they found themselves transported to ancient Lin'an, on a road at the outskirts of the city. The noon sun blazed above, and a putrid smell filled the air. The sight of old Lin'an city of 200 years past, plagued nightly by hordes of ghosts and accompanied by the heavy stench of rotting flesh, unfolded slowly before their eyes, like a weathered scroll scorched by flames of war. Ooh, that sounds very ominous. The descriptions that Meatbun does are so vivid. Okay, chapter 63. This venerable one sees whom? Please let it be Chuaning. Why do I want his true identity to be revealed? Because then I know that the sweetness that we've been seeing in the past chapter is gonna disappear. But still. Okay. This version of Lin'an City was deeply embroiled in war. Congealing blood covered the ground as far as the eye could see, and they were surrounded by crumbling walls and ruined houses. The trees and greenery had withered away, suffocated by the heavy miasma of malicious ghosts. Moran hadn't yet collected himself before he heard some strange sounds and looked up. Not far away, fresh entrails hung from the branch of an old pagoda tree. Oh my word. Could someone, I know it's a lot of work, but if someone could just give me the timestamp that we're currently at so I can give other people who might be in the rewatch crew a spoiler warning, or not a spoiler, trigger warning, because that is, oh, that's grim. Oh, okay. Where are we at? Okay, not far away, fresh entrails hung from the branch of an old pagoda tree, and a dozen crows had set upon them to feast as blood and flesh dripped from them non-stop. Underneath the tree lay the corpse of a middle-aged man. Blood and organs spilled out from where his stomach had been torn open by claws. No one would ever know if he had died with his eyes open or closed, as his eyeballs hadn't been pecked away. That is... Thank you for that imagery. Moran was no stranger to such scenes. In his past life, he had once crossed the breadth of the mortal realm to put all 72 cities of Rufang sect to the sword. When he did, blood flowed like rivers, and corpses had lain strewn over the fields, amounting to a sight much like this one. Yet for some reason he couldn't understand, even though he had revelled in the blood he had spilt in that life, and even though it had made every fibre of his being sing, now, laying eyes on a similar scene of devastation filled him instead with a biting sympathy. This is so grim. Thank you. Had it been faking docility for so long that his true nature had, without his knowledge, changed? As he pondered, he heard the sound of hooves ahead, accompanied by a cloud of dust. Anyone galloping around in such war-torn times was probably bad news. Moran yanked Chuaning behind himself, But there was nowhere to hide on this barren old road. A group of riders swiftly emerged from the dust cloud, some dozen in all. When they got closer, it was apparent that their horses were the opposite of sturdy. A few were so starved that their ribs protruded. Oh, this is not. The riders were dressed in a uniform style, white attire with bright red patterns and helmets embellished with feathers in like colors, and each had donned a circlet of intertwined dragons. The clothes were stained yet tidy, and the people were thin but spirited. Even more unusual was the fact that each of them carried a bow and a full quiver of arrows on their backs. In times of war, the two most valuable things were food and weapons. These were plainly not ordinary people. Moran was still trying to decide if the new arrivals were good or evil, friend or foe, when one among them, a youth of only 14 or 15, cried out in horror, "Dad! Dad!" The youth stumbled off his horse and fell to the muddied ground below, but he scrambled up and staggered towards the tree, where he threw himself on the mangled body of the middle-aged man, crying miserably, "Dad! Dad!" The other riders wore expressions of pity, but they had all undoubtedly seen too much death already, so much so that they had numbed to it. While the youth held the corpse and cried in agony, no one deigned to get off their horse to offer him comfort. One of the riders noticed Moran and Chuaning standing not far away. He was startled for a moment before asking in a thick Lin accent, "You two aren't from around here, are you?" "Yeah," Moran answered. "We're from the Sichuan region." "That far away?" The Oscar was shocked. "These days, the world is full of ghosts as soon as the night falls. How have you two survived this far?" "I can fight a bit." Moran knew it would be best to reveal as little as possible, but since these people didn't seem to be malicious, he pulled Chuaning out to change the subject. "This is my younger brother. We were passing by and stopped to rest for a while." Some of the riders seemed a touch taken aback by the sight of Chuaning. A couple turned to whisper among themselves. "Something wrong?" Moran asked, alarmed. "It's nothing," said the young man at the head of the group. "But on to serious matters. You should go to the city if you want to rest. There may not be any monsters around right now, but once night falls, ghosts will be crawling through the streets. Xiaoman's adoptive father came out looking for food during the day yesterday, but there was a thunderstorm, and he couldn't make it back before sunset, so—" He sighed heavily and didn't finish. I'm assuming this is the dead man that is lying over there. Shaman was the name of the wailing youth, and the corpse underneath the tree was his adoptive father. Such occurrences were commonplace in these chaotic times. Someone in a family would go out looking for food and be perfectly fine as they left in the morning, only to never return come nightfall. Even knowing that these events were already 200 years past, Moran felt a tightness in his chest as he watched the youth cry so miserably that it seemed he was about to weep blood. This was followed by a sudden unease. Had he grown soft? He'd barely blinked when killing people in his past life. "I'm kind of glad that you have, though. Much appreciated that you have. Hi." Moran grabbed Chuaning and bid the group farewell. "When you get to Lin An City, find somewhere to stay for a while," the leader said. "We're planning to relocate everyone to Putu soon, where an abundance of spiritual energy has warded off the ghost invasion, at least for the time being. You should come with us rather than traveling with just the two of you." "Relocate?" "That's right." The leader's eyes sparked to life, and even his face seemed to light up. "It's all thanks to Chugong's brilliant plan. Everyone in the city, from the elders to the infants, will get to keep their lives. But enough chatter. We still have to patrol the border before it gets dark. See if you can find any more survivors to bring back. Shaman, come on, we should go. Chu Gongzi as in Chuaning's father? I hesitate to think it would be Chuaning because I don't like they haven't really specified Chuaning's age, but it didn't seem like he was um like super long lived. He is the Baidu immortal, so maybe he has lived quite a few years, like 200 years. I'm not sure. Thank you. Hope you have a good day. Oh goodness. Moran sighed and tugged at Chuaning's hand. Let's go to the city first, he said quietly. Chuaning nodded, but suddenly asked, Do you think they managed it, in the end? The small hand in Moran's felt a little cold. Do you want the truth, or a lie? The truth, of course. The lie would be better for a little kid. So Chuaning answered his own question. They didn't. That's right. See, you already knew the answer, but you still had to ask, as if it would have changed the outcome. Chuaning ignored that. Do you know why they didn't make it out? It's not like I'm some 200-year-old demon. How would I know? Chuaning fell silent for a while. 200 years ago, he said gloomily, practically everyone in Lin'an City died. Moran was silent. Only a few escaped. Wait. Shidi, you're so young. How do you know so much? Chuaning shot him a glare. The Yuheng elder reviewed this in history lessons more than once. You decided not to pay attention in class, then turned around and asked me how I know things? How despicable. Of course you would take offense to that, Chuaning. Moran was speechless. Sure, I spaced out in class, but even my owner Shizun didn't scold me. What are you lecturing me for? Then again, there was no point in arguing with the kid, so he let it slide. The pair headed towards the city, chatting along the way, and before long arrived at the city gates. The ancient city stood tall on the bank of the Qiantang River, and it was heavily fortified against ghosts and demons, with defense structures lining the walls and the perimeters. Countless corpses bearing cursed marks lay piled outside the city. Such remains, if not taken care of, would reanimate at night, Omar would. Cultivators had gathered outside to spread incense ashes on the corpses while the sun was high in the sky and the yang energy was strong. For the bodies afflicted with especially strong curses, they performed exorcisms using talismans upon which they drew with wine-dipped cinnabar. A pair of guards stood before the spiked defenses framed by the city gates, dressed just like the riders they had met earlier, with white attire trimmed in red and twin dragon circlets, as well as bows on their arms and full quivers of arrows on their backs. Halt! Identify yourselves. Moran repeated his story from earlier. The guards weren't there to refuse anyone entry, only to register new arrivals, so they were let through after putting their names down. Before leaving, Moran remembered that the riders had mentioned a Chu Gongzi. Since the relocation was this Chu Gongzi's idea, the fellow had to be crucial to breaking the illusion. Sorry to bother, sir, but might I inquire about someone? Moran asked. The guard looked at him. Aren't you from Sichuan? You know someone here? Moran smiled. No, but we met some sentry gentleman who mentioned a Gongzi by the name of Chu, the one who's going to take everyone to Putur in 2 days. I was wondering who this Chu Gongzi was. I know a bit of magic and wanted to see if I could help in some way. The guard looked Moran up and down, and seemed to decide that he must have a skill to have been able to bring a little kid all the way here without mishap. Chu Gongzi is the eldest son of the Lord Governor. The Lord Governor was killed a month ago when the Ghost King descended, and the Gongzi has led us since. The Governor's son? Moran asked, and Chuaning exchanged a glance. Then Moran Moran and Chuaning exchanged a glance. Then Moran turned and asked, "That's strange. How does the governor's son know magic?" "What's so strange about that?" The guard glared at Moran. "Since when was there a rule that you have to be in a big sect to cultivate? That the common people can't do it?" Moran fell silent. Sure, there were independent cultivators, but they never amounted to anything. It made Moran wonder whether this amateur Chugungzi and his half-baked plan was what had gotten everyone in Lin'an killed. As they followed the guard's directions towards the governor's residence, Moran soon realized how wrong he was. This esteemed personage, who just so happened to share a name with his Shizun, was inarguably no amateur. He saw a Shangqing barrier. A Shangqing barrier was a powerful variety of barrier formed of purified energy that was capable of warding off all evil. As long as this barrier stood, even thousand-year-old malicious spirits couldn't hope to pass it, much less the average ghost. This barrier required the caster to remain within its range in order to ground the spell, and it protected a relatively small area. Even a mighty Zongshi like Chuaning could only cover about half of Sishun Peak with one. Right here and now, this Chugongzi of 200 years ago had erected a Shangqing barrier that covered a radius of 10 miles around the governor's residence. Although a far cry from Chuaning's capabilities, it was certainly far from an ordinary achievement. Moran and Chuaning headed towards the gates of the residence. Moran intended to try his luck and have someone notify the Governor Gongzi that a cultivator was offering to help. He wanted to see if the man would be willing to show them the courtesy of a personal meeting. However, when they turned the corner, they were met with the unexpected sight of 3 long lines of people queuing in front of the gates. 6 female attendants, dressed like guards, were bringing out large wooden barrels, and hundreds of emaciated people, the elderly, the infirm women, and children, were waiting their turn to receive porridge. Those who had received their porridge went to a high-tongue tree by the residence. This all just seems too much like it's somehow connected to Chuaning. And the fact that this man shares his name just is like the cherry on top, because high-tongue trees I now always associate with Chuaning. Oh goodness, I have completely missed... No, I have not missed the time. Sorry, I forgot that we started past. Okay, I think I'll take the break at past as well, and then we'll continue after that. Let's see. Beneath it stood a man dressed in white, his long, inky hair loosely tied back, passing out protection talisman and patiently repeating instructions. His back was to Moran, so he couldn't see the man's features, but he heard people who had received the talismans murmuring, "Many thanks for Chu Gongzi's kindness, many thanks for Chu Gongzi's kindness," as they dispersed. So this was the Governor Gongzi? Curious, Moran dragged his little shiddy around to get a look at the fellow's face. Just one look, and Moran's eyes were bulging out of their sockets. It was as if he had been struck by lightning. Wasn't that Chuaning? It wasn't just Moran. Chuaning was also gobsmacked. Even though they strained to see him from their place at the end of the line, this Governor Chu Gongzi had a lean face with sword-like eyebrows and phoenix eyes, but a gentle curve to the line of his nose, and he even wore all white, just like he himself did. Chuaning was struck dumb. Moran was also struck dumb. After a long while of being frozen stiff, Moran asked shakily, "Shidi, don't you feel like this Chu Gongzi looks just like a certain somebody? Like the Yiheng elder, Chuaning said dryly. Moran smacked his own leg. Right? What's with that? Who is this? What's his relationship with Shizun? Why are you asking me? How would I know? Moran was frantic. I thought you paid attention in class. This obviously isn't the content of any class, said Chuaning, irked. Then they fell silent again, scooting forward slowly with the line. Both of them stared unblinkingly at the gongzi. Upon closer inspection, Chu Gongzi didn't look exactly like Chu Wanning. This gongzi's features were more mild and scholarly. His eyes weren't quite as long and narrow. His pupils were softer, and his gaze was much gentler. Moran stared and stared, then suddenly let out an "Eh?" and turned to look down at his little shidi. Let me look at you. What do you want? Chuaning turned his face away, ruffled. At this, Moran only grew more persistent, reaching out to grab his face and forcefully turning him back around. He stared for a while, before finally coming to a realization and muttering, "Ayah!" Chuaning forced himself to remain calm. What is it? Moran narrowed his eyes. No wonder those people outside the city were murmuring among themselves when they saw you. I just noticed, but you look kinda like Shizun too. After a long pause, Chuaning hurriedly wrenched himself out of Moran's grip, the tips of his ears turning red. Nonsense. How come those guards noticed immediately, but it didn't occur to me for ages? Chuaning did not dignify that with a response. In the midst of the puzzlement, the voice of a young child called out, "Papa." Oh my word! I don't know what we're about to get, but I'm here for it. Oh goodness. Okay, where are we at with time? Okay, we are at chapter 64, so I think maybe I should pause it here, quickly take the 10-minute break, and then we shall come back for the rest. Let me just... Oh my word, like this is not anything that I was expecting. Like obviously once the chapter got started, it kind of started leaning towards that. But in terms of like, if you had to give me a bingo card of what I thought would be happening in this volume, none of these things would be on that bingo list. Like him getting shrunk back to his 6-year-old self, a possible like the father or the grandfather of Chuaning showing up in a flashback while they were on Peach Blossom Springs. None of that. None of that is something I would have considered to have happened. So yeah, this volume just feels like it keeps on surprising me. We shall see where else it takes me, but let me quickly just take my break and then I'll see you guys again in a bit. Is the audio okay? I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I pressed the wrong audio now. I really need to relabel these, sorry about that. Yeah, okay, just let me know if the audio is okay. Let me just quickly get resituated. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, chapter 64. This venerable one tells Shadi a story. Moran looked in the direction the voice had come from, only to see its source waddling unsteadily in a little jog from the stone steps of the residence. It was a small child, 3 or 4 years old, a bamboo pinwheel in hand as he bounced towards Chugongzi. He was dressed simply, with a jade pendant hanging around his neck, along with a lock of entrusted name for good fortune. Okay, there is a note explaining entrusted name, so I will read that after we finish with the page. For good fortune and a protection amulet of red silk. He looked every bit like Moran's little Shadi, just smaller. Moran stared. Now he knew the true reason those riders had been gossiping. He couldn't help muttering, Shadi, you and Shizun are both from Lin'an, and Shizun even has the true name. Do you think this true family from 200 years ago might be your ancestors, and that you two might be distant relatives? Seems pretty likely to me. Chuaning said nothing, staring at the father and son. He'd never known his own origins, and he didn't remember much of his childhood either. Could this Chu Gongzi really be his ancestor? He was still pondering this when Moran reached the front of the line. Chu Gongzi was about to hand Moran a talisman when he looked up to see an unfamiliar face. He paused minutely before smiling gently. Okay, let me just go back. So, traditional jewelry shaped like a lock and worn around the neck. Parents take their 1-month-old child to cultivators or a temple to be given an entrusted name so that the child can receive the protection of the gods or Buddha. The lock represents binding the child to life. Okay, that's really cool and interesting. Is this your first time coming here? His voice was mellow and refined, worlds apart from Chuaning's ice-cold severity. Yeah. Being suddenly spoken to in such an open and friendly manner by someone who looked just like his Shizun had Moran feeling some kind of way, and he had to scramble to get his bearings. The governor Gongzi smiled. My name is Chushun. May I ask for yours? My name is Moran. From where does Mogongzi hail? Really far away. From Sichuan. Chushun Gongzi, oh my word, was gentle and amiable, but Moran couldn't shake the feeling that the man could see right through him. That is indeed quite far away, Chushun agreed with a smile. Then he paused. His gaze shifted down towards Chuaning, and surprise crossed his refined feature. And this is? My name is Shasini, Chuaning supplied. Moran pulled him closer and patted him on the head, forcing a smile. This is my little brother, he said as he thought. He doesn't look like me, but he sure looks like you. Like, if this was any other situation, if Moran was a woman, there would definitely be the situation of, oh, this must be their, a secret love child or something like that. Maybe it was because battle was imminent, and there was more pressing matters at hand, and therefore Chu Shun didn't have time to dwell on it. Or perhaps it was because he was merely part of an illusion, and didn't have the ability to really react to something that didn't originally belong in this fabricated realm. Whatever the case, he stared at Chu Wanning for a while, his brows scrunched together, then simply handed them each a talisman. These are difficult times, and you are our guests from afar, so please accept these talismans. If you have no other plans, then please stay for a couple of days. I mean, if the other people could gossip about Chuaning looking like Chushun, then probably Chushun can react to Chuaning looking like him as well. I've heard that Gongze intends to bring the people of the city to Putuo, said Moran. What's the talisman for? These are spirit-quenching talismans, Chushun explained. When worn on the body, they can conceal the aura of the living. Moran understood at once. Ah, I get it. If the aura of a living being is sealed, then any ghost they meet won't be able to tell them apart from the dead. That way, even if we walk right past some ghosts, they'll be too confused to do anything. Chushun smiled. Precisely. Understanding that Chushun Gongze was quite busy, Moran didn't want to take up more of his time with questions, so he thanked the man and pulled his little shidi along to the side. The two of them found a spot by a wall to sit down. Moran turned towards Chuaning to see the boy staring in a daze at the talisman. What are you thinking about? He asked. I was thinking that this is a solid plan, Chuaning murmured, still deep in thought. But in that case, just what happened to prevent them from escaping in the end? Is it not in the records? This 200-year-old disaster is covered in the most detail in the Lin An records, but even that book only spares a few lines of text to describe it. What does it say? Lin An was besieged, the situation therein unknown. By the time the resistance army broke through, corpses lay strewn across the roads, and the vast majority of the houses were empty. Of the approximately 100 people of the governor's residence and the 740 common folk, no one survived. After a long moment of silence, Moran said, Nothing about how they died? This is interesting. I didn't expect we would get like a mystery on top of this mission. But also, not gonna lie, I kind of wish we'd found out who the little kid was who called out to his father. Like, what was his name? Was it Chuaning? Or was it Chuaning's father? Because it's not like 200 years is a decent amount of time, but it's not like hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's not a lot of generations separating it out. Nothing. Lin An City was completely surrounded, and hardly anyone made it. The feathered tribe saved a lucky few later on, but they rarely involved themselves in mortal affairs, so they see things differently from how we do. As far as they're concerned, the truth of what happened isn't all that important, and even if they knew, they still wouldn't talk about it unless there was some particular need to do so. Chuaning paused. But since these people are setting off in 2 days, we'll learn what happens soon enough. In the meantime, we might as well walk around and see if we can find some clues. The two of them tucked away their spiritual quenching talismans for safekeeping, and were just getting up to leave when there was a flurry of footsteps followed by a tug on Chuaning's sleeve. Xiao Gege! Chuaning turned around. It was the little Gongze who looked just like him. Xiao Gege, the boy said in a small, childish voice. Papa said you two don't have anywhere to stay, so if you don't mind, you can stay with us tonight. Chuaning and Moran looked at each other. Is that really okay? Moran asked. Your papa is already so busy. It's okay. The little fellow grinned guilelessly. Lots of people with nowhere to go are staying with us already. We're all living together. Papa keeps the ghosts away at night, so we don't have to be scared. He spoke with little pauses, not yet used to linking so many words together, but his open sincerity was heartwarming. Okay, well, we'll be imposing on you tonight then, said Moran. Thank you, Shah Didi. Hee, no worries, no worries. That's so cute. I can't to think that this poor kid probably died. Although, theoretically, he might not have, because if he is related to Chuaning, he might have survived, which would be where Chuaning, hails from. If I can put it like that, I'm not sure. Watching him bounce away, Moran tugged on Chuaning's hand. Hey, really, I gotta say something. I know what you want to say, so shut it. Read my mind again? Moran ruffled his hair, grinning. Once we get back to Shizun Peak, I really gotta ask Shizun about this. Between the two of you, one looks like the dad, and the other looks like the son. There is no way you guys aren't related to Governor Chu. After a moment, Chuaning said, So what? Even if we do turn out to be related, what then? Eh? Chuaning looked mildly towards the father and son beneath the tree. It's all in the past anyway, he said expressionlessly. They're already dead. Then he turned and walked away. Moran stood rooted in place for a while, before running after him. Oi, aren't you a little too young to be so cynical? He murmured. Even if they're dead, they're still your ancestors. If I were you, I'd definitely erect a shrine for them, with a statue 9 feet tall, all gold, decked out in jewelry, and burn incense for them every year. I'm counting on my ancestors for protection, you know. Hey! Why are you walking so fast? While wandering through the city, they noticed that every family was gathering straw and making straw men. When they inquired about the practice, they were told Chushun Gongze had asked the citizens to do it. Everyone in the city, young and old alike, had to have a matching straw man in which to insert a talisman with a drop of that person's blood. These would substitute them as decoy puppets. It was the same basic idea as tossing a bunch of meat-stuffed mantua into a river as offerings to a river deity that demanded human heads. Some ghosts and deities were simple, fundamentally not that smart. Any little trick could fool them, like that ghost mistress from Butterfly Town, who had nothing but mud rattling around between its ears. It seemed that Chu Shun had arranged at least 2 layers of precautions for his citizens. The first was the spirit-quenching talismans, so that they wouldn't be discovered by ghosts while running away. The second were these straw puppets, which would act as decoys to buy some time for their escape, so that the ghosts wouldn't immediately notice everyone in the city had vanished and become infuriated. This only made the haze in Moran and Chuaning's hearts heavier. How at such a carefully crafted plan ended up falling through. They returned to the governor's residence, filled with misgivings. It was dark by then, and many families had bought bedding to stay the night within the Xingqi barrier rather than return to their homes. The governor kept his gates open at night, with only a few guards patrolling the premises. By the time that Moran and Chuaning arrived, all the rooms of the residence were filled, with at least 3 or 4 families huddling in each. People were crowding everywhere, with hardly any room left to stand. In the end, they could only find a corridor to rest in. There was no bedding, of course, so Moran padded the ground with some straw he had requested from the guards, picking up Chuaning and laid him on the makeshift pallet. You'll have to make do with this tonight. Looks comfortable enough, said Chuaning. Really? Moran laughed. I thought so too. I love this so much. Okay, sorry, I missed it. Hi, how are you? Busy right now, but going to listen to the recording of the stream once I get back to my work. Listening to the stream makes my shifts feel shorter. Thank you so much. That's so nice of you to say. Sorry, I don't often hear that, so that was so nice. That's usually what I do too. This is so cool. Okay, sorry. Me getting distracted. I will focus. Where was I? Okay. He flopped down next to Chuaning and stretched, then folded his arms behind his head and stared up at the wooden beams of the ceiling above. Shidi, take a look. Those bird people aren't half bad at weaving illusions, huh? They only have a survivor's memories to serve as foundation, so it's really something that the illusion is so detailed. You can even see the texture of the wood on the ceiling. The feathered tribe are half immortal, after all, said Chuaning. Even if they're not omnipotent, they're capable of feats beyond mortal ability. But my question is, what if Chuaning, without knowing it, what if he is the original survivor that they drew this from? Or maybe it's one of Chuaning's family members. Because it would have to be one of them for, like, they would have had to have been one of the surviving few. And it would make sense if the person who they drew the memories from was someone who lived in the residence, so that they would have so many details about what this place looked like. Because if you live in a place every day of your life, for a while at least, you're gonna know exactly what every part of it looks like. The feathered tribe are half immortal after all, said Chuani. Even if they're not omnipotent, they're capable of feats beyond mortal abilities. I guess so, Moran blinked, then rolled to face Chuaning, propping his head up. I can't sleep. Chuaning glanced towards him and stared. What do you want, a bedtime story? He was being sarcastic, but Moran's face was as thick as the city walls. Yes, please, he laughed. I want the one about Dongyung and the 7 fairies. Oh my word, is that like their version of Snow White and the 7 dwarfs? Chuaning hadn't expected him to take the offer seriously and was taken aback for a moment before turning away in a huff. You wish. How old are you? Aren't you embarrassed? Moran grinned. It's only human to want the things they can't have. It's got nothing to do with age. I never had anyone to tell me bedtime stories when I was small, and I always thought about how nice it would be to have someone like that. But that someone never showed up, and then I grew up and stopped thinking about it. Even so, deep inside, I still want it. Chuaning was silent. You didn't have anyone to tell you bedtime stories either, did you? Oh, there's more. Okay. Look at it. It is so beautiful. I love it. Now I really kind of want a manhwa official version of the READALONG manhwa, because that one is also beautiful. I know some people have mixed feelings about it, but for me, I actually quite like it. So you don't actually know how to tell the story of Dongyong and the 7 fairies. Sorry. So you don't actually know how the story of Dongyong and the 7 fairies goes, right? What's the point of those silly stories anyway? Chuaning asked after a long pause. Just admit you don't know it. Don't write it off as a silly story either, or you're gonna grow up into a boring person like my Shizun, and everyone will avoid you. Moran, my dear Moran, you really have foot and mouth syndrome, like, amazingly. Who cares if everyone avoids me? Chuaning snapped. I'm going to sleep. With that, he lay down and closed his eyes. Moran rolled around with laughter until he rolled over next to Chuaning. When he gazed at his little Shidi with his eyes closed, his eyelashes long and dark, looking quite adorable. He reached out and pinched his cheek. Are you really asleep? I'm really asleep. That's not what you sound like when you're really asleep, though. Moran laughed. Then you keep sleeping, and I'll tell you a bedtime story. You know one? Yep. Just like you know how to sleep talk. Chuaning shut up. Moran lay next to him on the straw bed, their heads merely inches away. He cackled for a bit, but after a while, when he saw that Ishidi was pointedly ignoring him, he stopped being quite so boisterous, and instead gazed up at the ceiling, eyes still lit with mirth. Now and again the smell of the straw wafted over them, accompanied by the quiet sounds of the night. The story I'm about to tell you is one I made up myself. I envied those who had bedtime stories when I was young, but there was nothing for it, so every day I would tell stories to myself while lying in bed. I'll tell you my favorite one now. It's called Ox Eats Grass. Of course it is. That sounds like such a Moran name to give something. Oh my word. Guys, the chapter title. Chapter 65. This venerable one's story is super bad. I can't deal. What's the time? Okay. Oops. Having spoken to this point, Moran smiled again before he continued. A long, long time ago, there was a small child. Xuaning's eyes were closed. Wasn't this about an ox grazing? What's with the kid? Let me finish. Moran grinned. Once upon a time there was a small child who was very poor and who didn't have a mom or a dad. He was a child laborer in the household of a lord. He had to wash dishes, wash clothes, and wipe the floors, and he also had to take the ox out to graze. Every day the landlord's household gave him 3 pieces of flatbread to eat, and the child was very happy that he could fill his stomach. One day he took the ox out to graze as always. On the road they bumped into a mad dog that bit the ox's leg. Because of this, the landlord unsurprisingly gave the boy a sound beating. After the beating, the landlord made the boy go kill the mad dog to vent his rage. If the child didn't, the landlord threatened not to give him his flatbread. The child was scared and could only follow orders. So after he beat that mad dog to death, he brought it back. Thank you for this. I really don't need it. If someone could just drop the timestamp again, because yeah, animal abuse is not really something that a lot of people are okay with, including myself. Yeah, no, Moran's naming is truly something else, shall we say. However, when he came home, the landlord discovered that the dog had bit his ox's leg was actually the beloved pet of the country master. Oh, great. Thank you. Chuaning opened his eyes. And then what? What else could they do? The dog was the countryman's master's favorite, and due to the master's position, it was used to having its way and being a bully. Who could have imagined it would be beaten to death like that? If the country master were to find out, he wouldn't just let it go. The more the landlord thought about it, the angrier he became. So in the end, he didn't give the child his flatbread. He even threatened to hand the child over to the country master. If the country master came looking. What is this mess? So unreasonable. I'm not listening to this anymore. Lots of things are unreasonable to begin with, Moran laughed. It's all a matter of who has more money, whose fist is tougher, and whose position is higher. The next day the country master indeed came knocking, and the child was handed over. But because he was so young, it would have been unbecoming of the country master to lock him up, so he was flogged 10 times and released. And the child ran away after that, right? Chuaning asked. Huh, he didn't run away. The kid returned to the landlord's household, recovered from his injuries, and went back to tending the ox for them. He was still getting 3 flatbreads a day. Wasn't he mad? As long as his stomach was full, he couldn't be mad. A sound beating is just a sound beating. After it's over, it's over. Things were peaceful for over a decade. By that point, the ox-herd boy had grown up. One day, when several esteemed guests came over to the landlord's house, the landlord's son, who was the same age as the ox-herd, saw one of the guests had brought a particularly beautiful agate snuff bottle. Okay, I don't know what that is. He took a liking to it, so he stole it. Why does this feel like a autobiography of Moran's rather than a bedtime story? The snuff bottle was an heirloom and extremely precious. The guest was quite panicked and looked all over the house for his possession. The landlord's son realized that he wouldn't be able to hide it anymore, so he stuffed the snuff bottle into the ox-herd's hands and told him that if he dared to tell the truth, they would never feed him again, and he would starve to death. Having listened to this point, Chuaning was at a complete and utter loss for words. He found himself thinking that although Moran had been lost at a young age and hadn't been able to grow up with his family at Shizun Peak, at the very least he had grown up at a pleasure house, where his mother was the madam. Even though it couldn't have been the happiest of times, it wouldn't have been miserable either. So why were all the stories he made up so gloomy and sad? I mean, it kind of makes sense to me. Moran went on, quite enjoying himself. The snuff bottle was soon found. The ox-herd could only brace himself and take the blame so that he could continue to have food to eat, and naturally what followed was another viciously sound beating. This time they beat him so badly that he couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. The landlord's son got away with it, so he secretly snuck a steamed bun stuffed with marinated pork to the ox-herd. The ox-herd wolfed it down and stopped resenting the landlord's son. Even though he'd harmed him, he never tasted such a delicacy before. So he held the bun. He kept saying, "Thank you, thank you." Not the meat buns being the thing that ties all of the love interests together. I know this is just like a fake love interest, but still. I'm not listening anymore. This time, Chuaning was actually aggravated. How could he stop resenting him? One steam bun and all is forgiven? And thanking him too? What was there to thank? Rand blinked innocently. No, you're not listening carefully. How am I not? The steamed bun was stuffed with marinated pork, Moran said with a grave air. Food does not fix everything, Moran. Chuaning was flabbergasted. Huh, look at your face. You don't understand, do you? Usually that kid only got his hands on a scrap or two of fatty meat on New Year's Eve. He had thought he was going to die never knowing the taste of marinated pork, so of course he'd thank whoever gave him some. At the sight of his little Shiri, stumped speechless by his words, Moran smiled brilliantly. Either way, this incident passed just like that. The boy still collected his 3 daily flatbreads, and time went on. One day... Okay, hear me out. It's not that bad. It's terrible. It's horrible to listen to this kid going through everything, but the lesson in this is that judging people, in my opinion, is judging people for being grateful for what they're given is like a privilege. You don't know how you'll handle that situation until you're in it. Being able to be prideful about what you're given is a privilege. It's not a luxury that everyone has, unfortunately. Okay, sorry, just give me a second. Where am I? Oh, let me also just grab a little bit of water. But anyway, okay, my point beside that was, I feel like with bedtime stories, the general idea is to learn a lesson, and I feel like this at least has a lesson in it, even if it's not a very nice one. So it still kind of serves its purpose, I suppose. Chuaning Wei was by now familiar with the pattern of Moran's tales. The moment one day was uttered, nothing good could follow. Sure enough, Moran said, one day the landlord's son committed another crime. This time he violated a girl at the neighboring mill. I'm gonna have to put so many trigger warnings at this. This entire book is a trigger warning, to be fair. Okay. This time, he violated a girl at the neighboring mill, and coincidentally the unlucky ox herd came upon the scene. And that child is gonna take the blame again? Chuaning asked. Ayah, Moran laughed. That's right. Congrats. You know how to tell stories now too. A pause, then I'm going to sleep. No, I'm almost done. This is my first time telling someone a story, so grant me some face, will you? Chuaning fell into a disgruntled silence. This time, the ox herd definitely had to take the blame, because the girl, unable to take the humiliation, had committed suicide. By way of bashing her head into the window. But the ox herd wasn't dumb. He knew that whoever took the fall would have to pay for this with their life. And there was no way he was going to give his up for the sake of the landlord's son. However, when he refused, the landlord's son locked him up, and the dead girl inside the mill, and ran off to report it to the authorities. I take back what I said. This story is truly as awful as the chapter title suggested. This ox herd already had a troubled history. When he was young, he'd randomly beaten the country master's dog to death. Then later he'd stolen a guest's snuff bottle, and this time he'd sexually assaulted a common girl. Naturally, he could not be absolved of his crimes. No one was willing to listen to him explain himself. He was caught red-handed, with all the evidence, so he was arrested. Chuaning's eyes went wide. And then he stayed in jail for a few months. When autumn came, he was sentenced to death, to be hung at the execution platform outside the city. As he followed along the execution procession, winding through the fields, he suddenly saw someone about to slaughter an ox, not far in the distance. He could tell at a glance that the ox was the very same one he'd been tending since he was young. Now that it was old, it didn't have the energy to plough the fields, but it still needed to graze. However, if it only ate and performed no labor, what use of it was it to the landlord? It had ploughed the fields for them its whole life, but in the end they were going to butcher it and eat its meat. I don't like this metaphor. Even as he spoke of this cruelty, Moran wasn't sad. He still smiled. That ox herd had grown up riding on the back of that ox, and he had told it many of his secrets, had fed it hay, had hugged its neck and cried when he'd been wrong. And damn it. Yeah, no, this entire chapter is a trigger warning. And taken it for his only family in this world. So he knelt down and begged the executioner to let him go bid farewell to the ox. Of course, the executioner didn't believe there could be such an attachment between man and beast, so he thought the boy was trying to pull a trick and didn't allow it. And then, the ox herd was hung to die. The ox was butchered. Hot blood flowed over the ground, and those who gathered to watch the show dispersed. That night, the landlord's household ate beef, but the beef was old and kept getting stuck in their teeth. They ate a little and didn't like it, and then dumped the rest. Chuaning was once again speechless. Moran flipped over, smiling happily at him. There! It's done. How was it? Get lost, said Chuaning. Hey! The first time I made this up all myself, I cried. You're so heartless. You're not even gonna cry a little? You suck at telling stories. Moran laughed a bit and put his arm over his little shitty shoulder to pat him on his head. Well, that can't be helped. Your Shizun is only so talented. All right, the story's done. Let's sleep. Now that I've thoroughly triggered you and probably given you nightmares, let's sleep. Sounds like a great idea. Chuaning didn't acknowledge him, but after a long time, he suddenly said, Moran, call me Shishong. Why is the story called Ox Eats Grass? Because, just like people, an ox has to eat. If you want to eat, you have to do a lot of work. If one day you can't work anymore, then no one will care if you live or if you're dead. Chuaning stopped talking again. From the yard outside there came the muted voices of those seeking refuge, and every now and again an ominous cry or two from ghosts and demons outside the barrier. Moran? Aya, so cheeky. Call me Shishong. Chuaning ignored him and asked, did that child really exist? Nope. Moran was quiet for a moment. Then he suddenly smiled, his dimples deep and charming. He squashed the little kid into his arms and said warmly, I made it up to tease you, obviously. Be good, go to sleep. Is it? Is it though? Is it really so obvious? I have never cried as much as this novel in any novel. It's really very frustrating and very dramatic at some points. I'm lucky my brain didn't run out of my nose. Thank you, that made me feel a little bit better. I'm glad the novel is divided into so many volumes. I don't think I could read this whole thing in one go. Same, I feel like I would definitely have like, you know how they say you have like viewers fatigue? I would definitely have readers fatigue if I were to try and read this all in one go. What's the time? Okay. Yet, unexpectedly, before long, there was a sudden commotion in the yard. Someone was shouting angrily. Are you still trying to see the gongzi? The gongzi is busy. Who has the time to attend to your business? Toss that corpse aside. Don't you know that the ones with the blue dots will rise? Are you trying to get us all killed? This voice was like thunder in the middle of a dark night, and the moment the prospect of a rising corpse was mentioned, there was an uproar. In a flash, everyone who had been asleep was sitting up and looking towards the commotion. Moran shielded the little Shidi behind himself and glanced over, frowning. "Hmm?" he said in a low voice. "Isn't that the guy from earlier?" The individual who was kneeling and being berated was indeed the youth named Xiaoman, whom they'd met when they arrived. He was still wearing the close-fitting clothes from earlier, but his behavior was entirely different. It was as if his entire person had been emptied out. He could do nothing but cling tightly to the dead body of his adopted father. The corpse's nails had grown significantly, a sure sign that a corpse would rise. When the others saw this, they all backed away. The head steward was scolding him sharply. "Your father was my colleague. I also feel terrible that he's killed. But now what? You were the one who cried for food last night, so we went out to find food for you. You dragged your dad to his death, and now you want to drag us there too." Shaman was kneeling on the ground, his hair wholly disheveled, and his eyes were red as he sobbed. "No, no, I'm not. Dad, Daddy, please, I beg you. Let me see the gongzi. The gongzi has a way to stop my dad's corpse from rising. I want to bury him properly. Please. I beg you all. Don't dismember him." Ugh. This is very grim. True, this book makes me cry at unexpected moments. The novel is amazing. My thing is just, like, I'm thinking about the live action adaptation, and a lot of it, I'm like, how on earth would this look as a live action adaptation? And it makes me so curious. I wish it would just release. By the time he uttered the word dismembered, he was choking on his sobs. He buried his face in his palms and wiped messily at his trembling lips. "Please, I'm begging you. Let me wait until the gongzi comes back. It's going to be midnight soon, and the gongzi is out, so how can he possibly attend to your wishes? You know that normal corpses can still be purified, but your dad's got these blue dots, and his nails have already changed. How can he hope to hold out until the gongzi gets back?" "No, he can. Uncle Leo, I'm begging you. I'll do anything. I'll think of a way to repay you after. Please, I beg you, just don't touch my dad. I beg you." The middle-aged steward let out a long sigh as he pleaded. The rims of his eyes were turning red. Even so, he replied, "I can't do that for you. Not when it would cost everyone else their lives as well. Gods. No, don't." It was too late. No one would help the boy. Everyone knew that if the corpse was left intact, then when midnight came, it would inevitably turn into a ferocious spirit. The corpse of Xiaoman's adoptive father was forcibly dragged away to be dismembered outside. Several people held the boy back, and his bitter tears flowed furiously, sullying his whole face as bestial howls escaped his lips. In the end, he was still half pulled, half dragged away in the distance. Let me guess, he's gonna be the reason why everyone perishes, because he's gonna somehow mess with the plan and domino effect. Once the storm had passed, and after some muttering whispers, the yard returned to its peaceful quiet. However, Chuaning did not fall back asleep. He lowered his head pensively. Moran glanced sidelong at his Shidi. "What are you thinking about?" "That person lost his father, then did something terribly foolish. Then, on top of that, his father's body was wrested from him. Of course he'd resent everyone. I can't be sure, but I suspect that he was the one who botched Lin Anne's migration." "I think so too," Moran replied without missing a beat. Chuaning shook his head. "It's too early to tell. We can't make any conclusive claims yet. Let's keep an eye on him from now on." Oh goodness. Well, at least they're like on the same page as me. I really appreciate that, and I also appreciate the fact that they're on the same page as each other, because that's just, yes. Chapter 66. This venerable one sees the heavenly rift for the first time. Okay, this is interesting. I don't know if we've heard the mention of the heavenly rift before, have we? Okay. By the second day, nothing unusual had happened. Shizun sent guards to tally the numbers of strawmen in the city to make sure that it matched the number of people. While the people busied themselves packing their few possessions, just one more night, and they would leave. First thing in the morning, to take refuge at Putu, in accordance with Shizun's plan. Moran sat by the gate of the governor's residence, watching the people come and go. He sighed. Shizun's plan is watertight. Unless someone leaks the info, the average ghost wouldn't have the brains to figure out that only decoy puppets will be left in the city. Someone must have ratted them out. Shidi, what do you think? No response. Eh? Shidi? Moran turned round. Without his notice, his little Shidi had wandered off to watch a squadron of riders getting ready. In his place was Chu Gong's son, sitting with his cheek in his hands. Dagger! Moran almost jumped at his sudden appearance. What is it? The little fellow pointed to the old Pulu. I've said this word before, and every single time it just escapes me again. Polonia tree nearby, in which a kite dangled from a high branch. Mama gave it to me. It got stuck. Can't reach, he articulated with some difficulty. Dagaga, help me. No problem. Moran leapt nimbly to the top of the tree, using Qinggong, retrieved the butterfly-shaped kite, and landed steadily back on the ground, smiling as he returned it. Here you go. Don't lose it again, okay? The little boy nodded. Moran watched him wandering around alone for a bit. He found himself thinking that Shizun probably didn't have the time to look after his son. Where's your mom? It's a bit busy around here, so I'll take you to her. Mama? Mama is at the mountains in the back. What's she doing in the mountains? Sleeping? The kid answered in a soft voice, looking at him guilelessly. Mama's always sleeping there. Papa takes me to see her when the flowers bloom in spring. Ah, Moran answered quietly, at a loss for words. The boy didn't mind. He was still too young to understand what death meant. He played happily with the kite in his hands for a bit, then looked up at Moran and shuffled over. Gurgur, thank you, he said in a whisper. I have something to give you. He dug around in his pockets as he spoke and finally produced a small half piece of pastry wrapped in reed leaf. No one in the city had enough to eat these days, so it was a mystery as to how the little guy had managed to save a piece of pastry. He broke it in half and handed the small piece to Moran. Dagurga, for you. Shh, don't tell anyone else. I don't have any more. That is so sweet. Moran was about to accept it when the boy suddenly changed his mind and took the small piece back, offering him the bigger half instead. Oh, that is so cute. And that's such a child thing to do as well. Like, at the start, you're like, okay, I'll give you a little bit of my thing. And then later you're like, okay, no, I'm trying to be nice here. I will give you the bigger piece of my thing. It's really yummy. There is sweet bean paste inside. The small act made Moran's heart all warm and fuzzy. He was used to poor treatment and didn't quite know how to respond to charity. He reached out and took the sweets with a mumbled thanks. The boy seemed quite pleased and grinned brightly, the curves of his dark eyelashes filled with warmth and kindness. Moran couldn't bear to eat the flour cake, so he wrapped it up using a leaf from the Polonia tree and tucked it in his robes. He intended to talk further with the kid, but in the end, the boy was a little kid, and the little kid's attention span. He had already bounced away into the distance. Chuaning came back around that point only to see Moran standing there, staring off into space. He raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" Moran watched the boy disappear and sighed. "I was just thinking, all these people, how come they all had to die?" Night descended. Dark clouds covered the skies while occasional bolts of lightning ripped through the heavens. As the night grew deeper, a terrible gale howled amidst the torrential downpour. Rain and its attendant yin energy enhanced the powers of the ghosts and other fiends. Shizun gathered the survivors of Lin An in his residence and bid them to stay inside the Shangqin barrier at all times. Yeah, I think this is the frustrating thing, is you can't really do anything to help because it's an illusion, and it's gonna play out how it played out originally regardless of what you do. Due to the rain, many of the areas that could usually be used as places of respite no longer served as such. Moran kept an eye on Xiaoman, but when more and more people crowded into the governor's residence to take shelter from the rain, Xiaoman ducked out of view. "Damn it," Moran muttered. "I'll go after him," Chuaning said immediately. He was small, after all, and he swiftly dove into the crowd and disappeared. He returned after a while with an irate expression. "He got away. Outside the barrier?" Moran fell silent, gazing at the downpour outside and the people bustling to and fro. This was all only an illusion of events that had come to pass 200 years ago. But he suddenly felt so wretched. The people around them had such hope on their faces. They believed that as soon as dawn broke, Chushun would take them to Putur, away from this ghost-infested hell. In the pouring rain, guards dressed in white and red put their all into making the final preparations so they could be ready to move when the sun rose. None of them knew how little time they had left. The night grew late still, and the noise died down as people dozed off, leaning against one another. However, Chuaning and Moran were wide awake. Their task was to wait for the Ghost King to appear, and to kill him. Since Shaman had already left the barrier, this night had to be the turning point. Moran turned to glance at Chuaning. "Why don't you get some rest? I'll wake you up if anything happens." "I'm not sleepy," said Chuaning. Moran stroked his hair. "Then eat something. We haven't eaten since coming here." "I'm—" When Chuaning saw the pastry Moran produced, the words, "not hungry," were replaced by a gulp. Moran handed it over. "Here you go." The fact that he's giving the food and like prioritizing Chuaning above himself, I die. Hi. I'm so like I'm assuming that I'm about to start crying because like the freaking story of the ox already had me emotional. I don't even want to think what I'm gonna be like once we get to the death of all these people. Chuaning accepted the sweets and broke it in half, giving the large half back to Moran and keeping the smaller portion for himself. "I can't." Moran stared blankly at him, face unreadable. Chuaning took a bite and uttered a questioning before asking, "Is it from Peach Blossom Springs? The flavor is a bit different from the ones before." "How so?" "It tastes of osmoto flowers." Moran forced a smile. "Oh? Chushun's son gave it to me. It's probably tradition for Lin An." "It is indeed," Chuaning said, opening his mouth to take another bite when he froze as if he suddenly realized something. All the color drained from his face. "That's not right." Chuaning shot to his feet, eyes wide, an expression ghastly. Moran hadn't the slightest idea what the problem was. "What's not right?" Chuaning didn't answer. Instead he walked into the courtyard and looked around in the pouring rain before picking up a sharp rock and firmly cutting his own arm. Blood gushed out. I'm assuming he's not allowed to eat food from the illusion. Moran grabbed him hurriedly. Are you crazy? Chuaning stared at the blood trickling down his arm for a moment before his head snapped up, his eyes intense. Have you still not caught on? He said harshly. Someone means to harm us. Blood ran down his arms non-stop, the crimson diluted by the rain. Chuaning's face was pale in the deluge, his dark brows knit tightly together and thoroughly drenched by the ceaseless downpour. Thunder rumbled and lightning split the skies, and for an instant the harsh light turned night into day. The sudden clap of thunder jolted Moran into understanding. He subconsciously took a step back. He knew what wasn't right. Nothing in an illusion was real, however realistic it might seem. It should have been impossible for a pastry to have any taste, or for a weapon to actually cause them injury. In short, it should have been impossible for anything within the illusion to affect them. Someone manifested the illusion, Chuaning said quietly. Manifesting an illusion, also known as illusion reification, I think, was not an easy task. The ones most skilled in the technique were those of the Gu Ye sect, whose motto was medicine for the people, divine physician for the heart. The latter half of the saying referring to the fact that some of them specialized in the art of manifesting illusions. Many people were unable to accept the passing of loved ones, but through illusion in reification, the dead could once more accompany the living. However, manifesting illusions were extremely difficult, so generally speaking, only short, individual scenes could be created, such as sharing a drink or taking a nap together. It would be only one thing at most. This illusion, on the other hand, was extensive and continuous, with a large variety of events, and moreover, it had been constructed by the feathered tribe. Even Gu Yu's own sect leader might not be able to manifest it all. Moran immediately thought of someone else. Could it be the fake Gochin from Jincheng Lake? Probably yes. And now I'm terrified. Before he could think on it further, a strange sound burst forth from the skies above. The dozing people jolted awake like startled birds, looking around with wide eyes before they finally stared up. For a moment it was deathly silent. The screams erupted like explosions of water droplets in boiling oil. The people tried to flee in every direction, only to discover there was nowhere to go, and the screams came from all sides. There was a fracture in the sky. An enormous, blood-red ghost's eye stared unnervingly down from directly above. The eye was so close that it was practically pressed against the barrier. A harsh, garbled voice boomed forth. Chushun, how very bold of you, a mere mortal, daring to deceive this venerable one. Excuse me? This venerable one? Is there like a second a second Moran floating around here somewhere? The Ghost King, Moran muttered. There were 9 kings of the ghost realm, and some were far stronger than others. The one before them now had yet to show himself, so there was no way to tell which one he was. That lone eyeball loomed in the sky, dripping with blood as it stared at the building below. Such arrogance! Absurd! You wished to save them, pathetic mortal. I might not have wiped out your city before, but since you wish to stand against me, I'll kill every single one of you. None shall be spared. With a shrill shriek, a blinding red light shot from the ghost eye, aimed directly at the barrier. Crimson clashed with gold, and for an instant all the other colors of the world ceased to be. The force of the impact sent debris flying into the howling gale and restless rain. The tree branches in the courtyard snapped one after another. The citizens inside the barrier grew hysterical, wailing as they huddled together. The Shangqing barrier withstood the first hit, but another flash of red followed immediately after and struck the same spot. The barrier held out, but a crack appeared. How arrogant, insufferable. The red light struck again and again, the impact thundering and sparks flying. When the barrier was on the verge of collapse, Chuaning's blood ran cold. Now that the illusion had been manifested, any attack that landed would be no different from one in the real world. If that attack were to hit them, both he and Moran might die. Golden light gathered at his fingertips. This would surely blow his cover, but the situation being what it was, he had no choice. I'm secretly kind of excited. He was about to summon Tianwen and get it over with when a resplendent bolt of light flew across the sky like an arrow and headed directly for the epicenter of the cracks in the barrier. The crowd turned to see Shizun standing on a tall roof. He cradled a phoenix harp, and at his fingertips, dancing across the strings, they sent bolts of lightning sweeping forth to gather at the barrier. Each drum was as sharp and powerful as the rupturing of metal. I've never heard that word. And they... Rupturing. There we go. That word I've heard of before. Rupturing of metal. And they instantly reinforced the Shangqing barrier that had nearly failed. Gongzi is here! Gongzi! The people below exclaimed one after another. Some even... Oh, goodness. Sorry, my OBS seems to have just disconnected and reconnected, so I don't know how much you guys missed. Let me just pause a second. Let me know if I broke off for a thing, if I have to go back and repeat something. While we're at it, let me quickly just drink a little bit of water. Oh my word, we're almost at past. Okay. So just to recap, Okay, so Chuaning almost unleashed Tianwen, and then luckily Chushun arrived and he's sorting out the barrier, more or less. People below exclaimed one after another, some even crying with joy. Chushun held his own against the eyes of the Ghost King. The pair exchanged 100 moves in an instant, and the Ghost King was altogether unable to encroach past the barrier. The cold voice rang again, across the sky, even more menacingly. Chushun, with your skills, you could have easily escaped by yourself. Why do you insist on meddling in affairs unrelated to you and making an enemy of the Ghost Realm? Your Majesty wishes harm upon my citizens. How could any of this be less unrelated to me? Ridiculous. We ghosts feed on the souls of the living. There is no difference between us eating souls and you eating meat. You will understand soon enough, once you're dead. This is like giving me ox eating grass flashbacks, and I don't need that from a ghost. I do not want to feel sympathy or anything. Chushun didn't miss a beat. The notes of his harp never paused. Then, we'll just have to see if your Majesty can take this head from my shoulders. As he spoke, the chords beneath his fingers rose to a crescendo, until a brilliant light pierced the heavens right into the bloody eye in the sky. Ugh! The terrifying scream shook. That was not terrifying on my part. I'm so sorry. That was not well delivered, but there we go. The terrifying scream shook the very ground they stood on. Fetid blood sprayed from where the eye had been burned by Chushun's spell, and the crimson downpour mixed with his shrill shrieks. In his anger, the Ghost King unleashed a blade of light many times stronger than those before it, striking out through the Sanguine rain. I'm not sure how to say that word. Sanguine? Sanguine rain? Chushun moved to block, but this attack was unlike the others, and the force of the impact forced him back several steps. The notes of his harp stuttered. Gongzi! Crack! There's a crack! The barrier is going to break! Mama! Mama! The crowd panicked. Those with families huddled together and sobbed, while those without cowered in corners and quivered. Chushun gritted his teeth, fire in his eyes, refusing to give up just like that. While he was locked in a stalemate with the Ghost King, light flared to life on either side of him. He glanced to his periphery to see Moran and Chuaning standing on either side of him. Standing with him, their scarlet and gold light flowing steadily into his own, once again sealing the barrier. A terrifying roar came from above. The ghost eye disappeared. The three of them descended to the ground, and the sky rained rotten blood for a while longer before they finally returned to clear water. Chushun, face pale, bowed to Moran and Chuaning. Many thanks for your help. Don't mention it. Moran waved his hands. Go get some rest. You look terrible. Chushun nodded. He had indeed burned through too much of his reserves, so Moran supported him to the corridor. The people who had been in disarray only moments ago saw that Chu Gongzi had repaired the barrier and saved them, so they gathered in gratitude, offering him water and draping clothes over his shoulders. Chu Gongzi, one said, you're all drenched. Please go warm yourself by the fire. Chushun thanked them one by one, but he was too exhausted to move on and could only turn down that person's invitation. Undaunted, the people carried over branches and made a bonfire beside him instead. Things gradually quieted down, save for the crackling of flames. Suddenly, someone asked, Gongzi, we took so many precautions, but somehow the Ghost King still saw through it all. Aye, what should we do? Yeah. How did they know we were going to leave? Gongzi said these ghosts couldn't tell the difference between the puppets and the real people. So how did this happen? Could it be? The man's voice faltered, and he snuck a glance at Chushun. He clearly wanted to say that perhaps Chushun had been wrong, that perhaps, somehow, somewhere, he'd messed up. The white-clad guards saw that glance, and one of them swept to rebuke the man with a furrowed brow. What are you trying to say? It's obviously because someone couldn't keep their trap shut and leaked the plan to the Ghost King. Who would tattle to the ghost, though? The person mumbled. It's not like there is anything to be gained from that. Then, seeing all the infuriated glares directed his way, he stopped talking, disgruntled. A while passed in silence before someone else said, Gongzi, that demon ghost definitely won't leave it at that. What should we do? Chushun, exhausted, didn't open his eyes, but his voice remained gentle. We just have to hold out until dawn, and then be on our way. They can do nothing in daylight. We have so many people, the elderly, the young, and some injured too. Can we make it to Putu Mountain in a single day? Don't worry about that, Chushun said softly. Get some rest. Just focus on the journey tomorrow, and I'll take care of the rest. Chu Gongzi had always protected his citizens. When he said this, everyone listened and did as they were told. A little kid came over, holding a piece of sesame candy, and offered it to Chushun. Chushun opened his eyes slightly and patted his head with a smile. He was about to say something when a shouting guard ran over panicked. Gongzi! Gongzi! Something terrible has happened. What is it? The little gongzi, shaman, outside the city god temple. The guard was too shocked to finish his sentence. He stammered some more, then fell to his knees and sobbed miserably. Shizun shot to his feet, what little color that lingered on his face draining away as he rushed into the rain. And I'm gonna have to end it there because we're already over our time and this is the end of the chapter. Damn it. Freaking cliffhangers. Okay, this was not an easy chapter. I'm just gonna say it. Like, this was not an easy, like, few moments within the live streaming. This entire live stream was pretty damn difficult in terms of the story. So I really hope we get some respite in the next live stream because this was a lot. Like, the story of the ox was just the freaking start of it all, and I should have known that because we had all the nice and warm and fuzzy feelings yesterday, this would be where we ended up today. So that's just wonderful. We love that. They really like to torture us. So anyway, I hope you guys still enjoyed it, and I will see you guys again next week for another 2 live streams. 再见。